All right, so today we're diving deep into comedic timing. But get this, our inspiration comes from a sloth.
A sloth. I'm intrigued, but slightly skeptical. How does a sloth connect to comedy?
Well, we're talking about this blogger, Stefan Pinkwart, who had this pet sloth named Ernesto. And Ernesto was all about taking things slow, like really slow.
Okay, I'm starting to get a picture, but how does that translate to humor?
So Stefan writes about this freezing January morning, and he's probably just dying for some coffee. But before you can even think about it, there's Ernesto, moving slower than, well, a sloth.
Right, famous for their speed.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But the real comedy show starts when it's feeding time. Stefan presents Ernesto with this leaf, and what does Ernesto do?
I'm guessing he doesn't just gobble it down?
Nope. Instead, he takes his sweet time, sniffs it, stares at it, almost like he's contemplating the meaning of life or something.
That sounds more like a test of patience than a comedy routine.
Oh, it gets better. Then Ernesto decides to scratch his butt.
So maybe that's his way of building suspense.
That's exactly what Stefan realized. He calls it the Ernesto tactic, using delay as a comedic tool to make a joke hit harder.
Delay, huh? So like making the audience wait for it.
Exactly. It's not just about pauses, but about making the audience crave that punchline. Stefan actually breaks it down into 3 steps. First, you set the trap with a relatable story, something that makes the audience feel comfortable.
Lulling them into a false sense of security.
That's the idea. Then you take away their hope. You tease them with little bits of information, just enough to keep them hooked.
Okay, I see where this is going. You're playing with their expectations.
Precisely. And finally, you deliver the explosion, which is the punchline, timed perfectly for maximum impact.
It's like a well-calculated setup and payoff.
Right. And Stefan gives this hilarious example in his blog about waiting in line at a bakery. So imagine you're stuck behind someone who can't decide between a croissant and a muffin.
Oh, I've been there. The agony of indecision.
Right. So Stefan paints this whole picture, the agonizing wait, the growing impatience, even jokes about someone dying of old age before they order, and then silence.
That's the taking away their hope part, I guess. I bet the audience is squirming by this point.
Oh, absolutely. And then the punchline. It was me, inside, if this old lady doesn't hurry up.
Okay, I have to admit, the delay makes it so much funnier.
See, Ernesto the Sloth, the master of comedic timing.
I'm starting to think maybe Stefan is a genius for finding inspiration in such a strange place.
Well, there's definitely something to that, but it makes me wonder, this Ernesto tactic, it's not just about jokes, is it? It feels like it's about understanding how to use silence and anticipation in any kind of communication.
I think you're right. It makes me think about how many opportunities we miss to create that same sense of anticipation in everyday conversations. Maybe we all need to channel our inner sloth a little more often.
Now you're getting it. So, what are your thoughts on this whole delayed punchline concept? As the expert, what stands out to you?
Well, it's fascinating how something as simple as a pause can completely change how a message is received. We've been talking about comedy, but I can see how this could apply to so many other types of communication.
Speaking of expertise, Stefan actually recommends his book, Poetry Master, as a resource for anyone who wants to learn more about this technique. He says it can give your words some serious power.
Turning words into a force. That's quite a claim. It seems like Stefan has discovered some real communication secrets thanks to his sloth friend. What else did he have to say about this Ernesto tactic?
Well, he explains that it's not just about getting laughs, it's about knowing how to create tension, how to play with expectations, and ultimately, how to make your message stick. He even compares a great communicator to a slam master who tortures the audience with anticipation. But in a good way, of course.
Okay, that's a bit intense, but I think I understand what he means. It's like you're taking the audience on a roller coaster. There are highs and lows, and that final drop is the punchline, or the message you want them to remember.
Exactly. It's all about crafting an experience. But, there's something almost philosophical about all of this. It's like Ernesto, with his slow, deliberate movements, is teaching us to appreciate the entire journey, not just the destination.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Maybe we all could use a little more sloth wisdom in our lives.
I agree. But before we all go off to meditate in the forest, I'm curious to hear more about how this Ernesto tactic can be used in everyday life. How can our listeners put this into practice?
That's a great question, and I think there are a lot more ways than people realize. But let's save that discussion for part 2. We don't want to give away all the secrets just yet.
You're right, we need to keep them in suspense, just like Ernesto. So, stay tuned, everyone. This sloth-inspired journey into comedic timing has just begun.
As we're talking about this whole comedic timing thing, it's striking me that it's not just about humor, it's about communication in general.
Right. It's like we stumbled onto this universal principle by way of a sloth.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. When we create that tension, that anticipation, we're tapping into something fundamental about how our brains work. We're wired for it.
It's like our brains crave that resolution.
Yeah.
They want to know what happens next.
Yeah.
And when we hold back, when we delay that resolution, it just makes the payoff so much more satisfying.
Exactly. And that's why a well-timed punchline hits so much harder, or a dramatic moment in a movie just grabs you.
It's like when you're watching a thriller and you're on the edge of your seat, completely engrossed.
Yes. And that feeling of suspense, that's all about timing. It's about how the story is paced. Just like Ernesto taking his sweet time with that leaf, a skilled communicator knows how to draw out the tension and keep their audience captivated.
And it's not just about keeping people entertained. These principles can be applied to any kind of communication where you want to persuade or inform or even just make sure someone's really listening to you.
Absolutely. Think about a speaker who really knows how to capture an audience. They use pauses, changes in pace, maybe even a little silence to emphasize their points and keep everyone engaged.
It's almost like they're conducting an orchestra with their words. The silence becomes as important as the sound itself.
That's such a great analogy, and it shows how these principles go beyond just comedic timing. It's about understanding the rhythm of communication.
It all circles back to what we learned from Ernesto, the king of suspense. Slowing down, taking your time, and using silence strategically can be incredibly powerful.
It's a great reminder that in a world that's always rushing us, there's real power in being more deliberate, more mindful in how we communicate.
I love that. It's not just about learning how to tell a better joke. It's about communicating more effectively in all areas of our lives.
Couldn't agree more. And that's a pretty profound takeaway from this little deep dive.
Now remember Stephen, the blogger we've been talking about. Well, he actually recommends his book, Poetry Master, to anyone who wants to really dig into this stuff.
Oh, interesting. What's the book about?
From what I understand, it's all about the art of using language to create a real impact, to connect with people on a deeper level.
That sounds like something worth checking out for sure, especially if it can help people communicate more effectively, whether they're aspiring comedians, writers, or just anyone who wants to get their point across.
And the best part is it's available in both English and German.
Perfect. No excuses not to give it a read. It seems like this Stefan really has some valuable insights to share, all thanks to his unusual muse, Ernesto the Sloth.
You got that right. But it makes you realize that inspiration can come from the most unexpected places.
Sometimes all it takes is a slow-moving sloth to remind us of the power of slowing down and embracing the pause.
Well said. This has been a truly fascinating conversation. But before we move on, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the question?
What areas in your life could benefit from a little bit of the Ernesto tactic?
Ooh, that's a good one. It makes you think, right? It's not just about comedy. It's about how we communicate in all aspects of our lives.
Exactly. Giving a presentation, having enough conversation, or just trying to make your point more effectively, these principles can be incredibly useful.
So, listeners, I encourage you to really ponder that question. Think about how you can bring in a little bit of that sloth wisdom into your communication.
Remember, sometimes the most impactful messages are delivered with a healthy dose of sloth-like mindfulness.
Wise words. This has been a fantastic deep dive. I can't wait to see where we go next.
Stay tuned, folks. We've got more to explore. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Ernesto tactic. It's been quite a journey.
It has been. Who knew we'd be learning about communication from a sloth?
Right. But before we wrap things up, I wanted to circle back to Stefan's closing words in his blog post. He said, "The true slam master tortures their audience and they'll thank you for it."
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement. A little dramatic, maybe, but I think there's a deeper truth hidden in there.
I think so too. It's not about actually causing pain or anything. It's more about understanding how to use that tension, that buildup, to really captivate the audience.
Exactly. When you make the audience wait a little, when you delay that gratification, you actually make the payoff so much more impactful.
Think about it. If every joke was a one-liner, if every story just rushed to the ending, it wouldn't be as engaging, would it?
Not at all. It would be like listening to a song with no dynamics, flat and boring.
Exactly. It's those pauses, those moments of silence, the anticipation, They create the rhythm, the intrigue, the emotional ups and downs that keep us hooked.
And as we've been discussing, it goes way beyond stand-up comedy. This idea of creating tension and release applies to storytelling, public speaking, even just having a regular conversation.
It's about choosing your words carefully, being deliberate with your delivery, not just saying whatever comes to mind.
Right, like a carefully crafted performance, even in everyday life.
So it seems like Stephen is on to something with that torture analogy. A little bit of carefully crafted tension actually makes the audience appreciate the payoff even more.
It's counterintuitive, but it makes sense. It's like you're giving the audience a gift by making them wait, letting them savor the anticipation, and then really appreciate the resolution when it finally arrives.
And that ties back beautifully to the whole sloth wisdom concept we've been talking about. It's about being present, being mindful of your audience, and respecting their time and attention.
I love that connection. And even though learning to use silence and tension strategically takes practice, it's a skill that can benefit us in all sorts of ways.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Embrace your inner Ernesto.
Embrace that slow, deliberate approach. And remember, sometimes the most effective messages are delivered with a little bit of sloth-like wisdom.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of comedic timing and the Ernesto tactic. And remember, you don't have to be as slow as a sloth to become a master communicator.
And if you're interested in learning more about the art of language and communication, be sure to check out Stefan's book, Poetry Master, Poesycraft, and Seven Taken. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to become a more impactful and engaging communicator.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, sometimes a well-placed pause can make all the difference.
Be creative, Stefan.